Yes, no, it's not that, and I'll just throw this out there. It's not that we were never going to talk about the Maple Leafs. It's just that, we have spent plenty of time talking about the Maple Leafs. And now that we're getting into this end rush, with all this exciting stuff happening in hockey, I think it's best to not discuss a team that is falling apart. But before we don't do that, Mike, explain what the story was that we're not going to discuss today on the actual show, but discuss now for a second.
Cathal Kelly, who's a columnist for the Globe and Mail, reported this morning that the MLS&E members of the MLS&E board met with Brendan Shanahan and the management team of the Leafs a couple weeks ago.
Can I just stop you there for 1 second? The MLS&E board. What do you think of this is a teachers group, correct?
No, not anymore. This is sports.
Okay, sorry. I still think of it like like an elementary school librarian, a janitor, and and some phys ed teacher sitting down and saying, "Oh, we got to blow this Leafs team up,"
And the head of the social studies department in Ajax.
Right. And the AV guy.
No,
this is not who it is.
I'm sure this is higher ups with Bell and Rogers because.
That's right. Yes, they were bought by Bell and Rogers. A company, and you are as dysfunctional as your parents, and this is what this proves forever. That they are owned by two companies that loathe each other. As their parent, that's, I guess, there you go. Doesn't fall far from the tree. Anyway, continue. What's the story, Mike?
So, what essentially came out of that meeting was that the MLS&E board members gave the thumbs up for Shanahan's plan to rebuild the team, which was a scorched earth policy in terms of clearing out the current roster, and trying to, basically 3 to 5 years of pain to get premium draft picks to draft their own players and develop through the draft, and like most of the top contenders did. They had short-term pain for long-term gain.
If only they had thought of this 5 years ago. But
and that is music. That is music to many Maple Leaf fans' ears because they are sick and tired of the patchwork that has been happening for a long time.
Yeah.
Hey,
you could do your PhD thesis on this team and be.
I was planning on doing my master's thesis on the league.
I know.
Hey, by the way, from now on, when there is a trade involving the Maple Leafs during the show, I will only give the half part of the trade.
Who the Leafs are trading, and I can guess who it is.
So Kevin, I need your help here because this is okay. We all know that the Maple Leafs, are a bread and butter team for every writer who covers the NHL. This is not like a surprise thing. So, but you hear where I'm coming from here, right?
Yeah, well, for sure. But saying all that, today I wrote a piece saying why all the non-major markets should be lining up for Phil Kessel.
I know you saw that.
He compared his stats to the stats of some of the top scorers in the league, and he's right in their neighborhood. I mean, if you, my point is obviously is that if you just are looking for scoring and offense, and you just want Phil Kessel to do what he does best, which is score goals, and leave him alone, and don't ask him to talk about it,
Right.
He's a great fit. Like I think he'd be a great fit in Nashville and Arizona and Carolina, and that's my column today. That there is a market for him, and you'd be doing Phil Kessel a great service if you trade him to a place where there is not a lot of media scrutiny. Because what's his real sin? His real sin is he wants to be left alone and score goals.
After the webcast, I actually gave it a little bit of thought, and I thought Nashville is the absolute perfect scenario for him because they have the cornerstone guys in Weber and Rene, and James Neal is arguably their best forward, or you could say Forsberg, but I'd like to see a little more proof. And Kessel could basically be a second line guy who could do his scoring, like you said, Kevin, and play on the power play, and nobody would bother him. And that would be a perfect scenario. But the thing is, from the Toronto point of view, they're going to expect, and I don't think it's unrealistic and unreasonable to expect, a first-round pick, a young roster player, and a prospect, like any other deal that for any other, not franchise player, but significant forward. That particular package. I think they can get that. I think they will get that, but I just don't think it's going to be during the year.
All right, so we're talking about this now because, and Kevin, you just by writing this story today, you're just teasing me.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, you can't really even talk about the trade deadline without talking about.
Yeah, no, you can't now, and that's
they're going to impact other teams. Like, Santorelli is a big catch, and Winnick is a big catch for some teams. I mean, we're going to have to talk about them, and if there are teams that, like the Nashville Predators, because I agree with Mike. I think Kessel would be a good fit for the Nashville Predators.
Yeah.
And they could actually make that work if they were willing to, and by they I mean the Maple Leafs were willing to accept players not on the roster. A first-round pick and maybe a B or B plus, prospects. With the idea being that just moving out Kessel's salary, creates a player to be named later scenario. I mean, when you get rid of $8 million, there was another player coming in the deal. You just haven't signed him yet.
Right, which I love. I love that.
So,
and that's such an important thing at this time of year to remember.
Yeah. So, I mean, they could actually make the deal. And, I think you've got to wash away anything that's happened, like the -4 the other night and all that's going on now with this team. If I'm a GM and I'm looking at trading for Phil, because I discount all of this, like the mess is so great now in Toronto that whatever's going on now at this point, it just leave that aside. I mean, Phil Kessel was clicking along, scoring goals like he always has until he created this big mess with the firing of Carlisle and bringing in Horachek and all the other stuff that's going on. So.
Yeah.
He could still get 30 goals, and if you prorate his 48-game season, he'd be looking at his 7th consecutive 30-goal season. And the numbers are pretty striking. I mean, he's right there with Kopitar and Patrick Kane, a little below Sidney Crosby in terms of his scoring rate, and he's still 27 years old. There's still, I get why he doesn't fit Toronto for sure. He's out of his natural habitat.
No, it's not. It's not. You should. It's like putting a lemur in a snake's cage. It's just it's completely wrong. And and by the way, hats off for MLSC for choosing the scorched earth metaphor in terms of an ice hockey arena, ice hockey team. Throw that out there because that is really completely.
Here's what I'd say about that too. I am never one. If I'm an owner and I go to my GM. And he says to me, I need 3 to 5 years to rebuild this team. I say to him, I need to get a new GM in 3 to 5 years.
Yes.
Because, this is supposedly the salary cap era.
Yeah.
Where people have to make hard decisions and there's cap space available that forces you to, go to the floor and to sign players and, to draft well. And, I'm looking more of a change on the fly scenario. Now, saying all that, I agree with this scorched earth. I think you almost have to rebuild from the chassis up with the Maple Leafs. There's only a few guys on that roster that I would keep. So
yeah.
And unlike the Kane situation, which we're going to talk about with Peter in a second, the Leafs are going to have to maximize the return that they get for the guys like Kessel and Phaneuf, which, again, I think argues for the move of them in the summer when there's more flexibility amongst the number of teams, which means they can get a greater prospects or greater, teams like Arizona, Carolina, they could take them on right now because they have the cap room. They may not have the room in the budget, but teams like Nashville, teams that are like in that sort of mid-contender level who want him would need the flexibility to take on an $8 million salary, and the Leafs are going to want to get as much back in return for Kessel, Phaneuf, and whoever else they end up trading. So I think the big names are going to be moved at the draft, but I wouldn't be surprised if guys like Bozak or even Jonathan Bernier, who there's been a few mentions of in the last few days, get moved because that'll be starting down the road of the rebuild. I think Toronto is going to be more involved than just the 3 rent-a-players that we've been talking about ad nauseum.
Yeah, I mean, and what we saw yesterday, let's start the show. It's the 12th of February. We've already been doing the show, kind of, but that's okay. So I will just I'll just start the show from here, and people have to watch the beginning. We'll tell them to look into it because we'll get right into it. Ready? So, Peter, I'll introduce you at the end, so we can just. You're on your second time. After 2 times, you no longer get introduced.
Yeah,
it just gets better as it goes along.
Right. By the time you're where Mike and Kevin and Josh are, you're just praying for this whole thing to end. All right, here we go. So, all right, ready? Hello, Hockey World. It's March 12th. It's Thursday. No, it's
there you go.
Sorry.
March 12th. All right. God. It's the glasses. I blame Lens Crasher. They sent me only left-handed left contact lenses. That's ridiculous. You never would send one contact lens to people. They're like, just put your left in both your eyes. And it's like, well, I just spent hundreds of dollars to get an eye appointment because you told me my eyes were different than one another, and now you're telling me I should just put the same one in both eyes? I don't think that's smart. Anyway, that's why I got the date wrong.
Sure.
Hi, Hockey World. It's February 12th, 2015.
I'm Michael Agello.
I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today Sports.
I'm Josh Rimmer.
And I'm Eklund, and you're watching the HockeyBuzzCast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast where we come to you every Monday through Friday from 1 o'clock p.m. on to around 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time to discuss the hockey news and what's going on and all the things. We try to get some of the best people on here. And today we have one of those best people, I think, or we have lots of best people, but one's a guest today. And that would be Peter Tessier, who is in the town of Winnipeg, the lovely nothing ever happens, no trades are ever made in Winnipeg. Peter, describe your thoughts yesterday when all this went down.
Well, no one is using the hashtag #StandPatChevy anymore.
Right.
He got himself into a high-stakes poker game, and I think he came out okay in his first player-for-player deal.
Yeah, it's a good deal.
I think he to use a cliched term, there's a bit of shock and awe going on around here. First, that it happened, but secondly, it happened so fast, and the return and what was included in the deal. If you go backwards in time a little bit, there were some rumblings near the end of the summer that the Jets were interested in moving Bogosian out, but no one really knew where or what. But they knew there was interest and not sure sort of the why behind it. But I think as time went on this season and the emergence of Dustin Byfuglien in an incredibly fit and sort of aware way as a defenseman has sort of said, we're deep on right-hand D, we can spare something. And then the whole Evander Kane thing. It happened. Buffalo now has what should be an elite power forward when healthy. And the Jets, for Evander Kane, have the expiring contract of Drew Stafford and 2 blue-chip prospects plus a first-round draft pick that could be anywhere from 16th to 30th.
Yeah.
I think the Jets have done okay. I don't know if they've answered all their needs in the trade. I don't think they were ever going to, but I think they've done okay. And and Jets fans should be somewhat happy about that.
Because the one thing I really wanted to know, and we kind of debated this yesterday, is, when I first heard this moving Bogosian for Tyler Myers essentially is the one thing that affects everything now. Like that's the one deal, and essentially, Evander Kane was done for the year anyway. Stafford could come in and could surprise people, and actually I do think that he's a really sneaky little pickup in this deal. But as far as the playoff run goes, and we know how important it is to make the playoffs in Winnipeg. It's Myers for Bogosian, in my mind. And, does this, in your mind, make them better for this particular playoff run?
I think it changes things. I think Tyler Myers has better hockey sense around him than he does the physical tools.
Right.
And I think Bogosian's the other way. I think Paul Maurice likes guys with hockey sense.
Yeah.
And he can work on the tools. I mean, Myers is a north-south skater. He doesn't have a lot of great edge work in his skating. He's not Zdeno Chara in the way he moves. but he has some hockey sense. He knows how to play the game. Bogosian's a beautiful skater, wants to be physical, has some interesting offensive instincts, but isn't, I don't want to say smart, but he lacks some instincts. He lacks some hockey intelligence in the way he plays. And he brings a different kind of dynamic on the back end. That's a dynamic the Jets have with Byfuglien. They have it with Trouba.
Right.
And they have it in their next prospect, Josh Morrissey.
Yeah,
they need more a Myers kind of guy. And I think in a structured environment, as Maurice has made the Jets defense, Myers could very well fit in quite nicely and improve his game back to what got him that big contract.
Yeah, this gives him a chance. And Trouba is the one name that people, I don't think outside of Winnipeg understand how good Jacob Trouba is. And I really do think that that's in a lot of ways people compare him, to Drew Doughty, and in circles that, I talk to. And that's pretty high praise, right? I mean, Jacob Trouba is a serious player.
Peter,
Kevin, a question for Kevin real quick, because this is just an aside, and something that's always fascinating about that particular draft, right? If you remember that draft where Bogosian comes out was a defensive draft. That was the defensive draft where you had Phaneuf, right?
No, Doughty.
Doughty, right?
Pietrangelo, Bogosian, and Shen. 4 picks in a row.
Right, all mixed together.
Johnson.
And they've really had a. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the Phaneuf and Coburn draft as well. They really are. All this defense. It's just a great defensive draft, right? But Bogosian's sort of been the one that's not like the others to me in that group. Do you get that at all, Kevin? Or?
Well, I mean, obviously, neither Shen nor Bogosian really lived up to expectations, and that's the interesting thing about this trade. Both Bogosian and Myers, I would say, and for different reasons. Bogosian has never really lived up to expectations. Has never been the dominant defenseman that was expected of him. Myers looked like he was going to be that in his first season with the Sabres, and then really has not developed beyond that. In fact, you can make a case that he's kind of slid backwards. But
right.
I still believe that everyone views that Myers was a product of his situation, that he still has more upside, that given the right opportunity, and he should have that in Winnipeg. He should be moving the puck up to a better group than he had in Buffalo. And I think that what was going on in Buffalo weighed on Myers, and plus there was always a lot of discussion about the fact that he hadn't been as good as he was in his rookie season, and I think that weighed on him. So I think a change of venue will help him. I like that trade. I agree with the assessment that it changes the Jets, and sometimes change is just all you're trying to accomplish, just a little different look, and the fact that Winnipeg has Morrissey coming and Trouba there, and my assessment of Trouba is right with yours. Like I think he's moved up and right with Seth Jones now in terms of potential, and I think we all know how I feel about Seth Jones' potential.
Yeah.
I think he's a potential Norris Trophy winner, and I think Trouba has that in him as well. I think we were talking about the World Cup before, and the fact that the Americans had both Trouba and Seth Jones at their age penciled in, and the Americans have a pretty good collection of defensemen for 1996, and now those two guys will be playing on the JV team.
On the under-25 team, yeah.
Yeah, and under-23. And to me, when you have Seth Jones and Trouba, that speaks to, this team could actually surprise some people. So, the Myers-Bogosian trade is the element that nobody saw coming to this trade. So, and I think it's fascinating, and I think it's a hard one to read. I think it changes both teams, and maybe both teams got the kind of player that they wanted, and I think my dog likes the trade.
Yeah, he's got definite opinions.
Yeah,
my dogs have been pretty neutral on it.
Yeah.
Ironically, Myers was picked in that same draft. He was picked 12th overall, and the only reason, it was said that the reason he fell in that draft, because he was considered up in the top 7 or 8 picks, but he had a knee injury that year.
That's right.
And that's why he fell to 12. But the thing is that, like I said, I think in terms of the defensemen, it's a wash. I think they both maybe needed a change of scenery. I just think that Winnipeg right now with putting Stafford in to fill the hole for Kane, at least in a short-term basis, with Enstrom, Bufflin, Myers, and Trouba, they arguably have, I would say, one of the top 2 or 3 top 4 defensive pairing or top 2 defensive pairings in the Western Conference. And the only thing that I think is a question mark for them going into the playoffs is whether Pavlik or Hutchinson can keep them, can play at the level to win them a playoff series. But I mean, I think up front and on defense, the trade helps them in the short term because it allows Bufflin to play on the blue line.
Okay, I'm going to take you to task on that one. They are not in the top 3 in the Western Conference in defensive pairings. I mean, just for fun, I'll throw out. I mean, as good as they are, they would be in the top 3 of the Eastern Conference in defensive pairings, but they're not in the Eastern Conference anymore, right? So, Nashville, Chicago, St. Louis.
Well, right now
those 3 are the top 3.
Well, I mean, the number 2 pairing in St. Louis is Shattenkirk and Carl Gunnarsson. I like every one of the Winnipeg defensemen over Carl Gunnarsson. I would say L.A. if Voynov was in the lineup, but you can't say that. I don't think San Jose is good. I don't think Anaheim is good. I mean, Bufflin. I mean, Bufflin is one of the better defensemen in this league. I mean,
you know that I'm 100% behind that and have been on the Bufflin bandwagon ever since he came in the league. He's a money player too, and he's a playoff player, and I mean, does this? And I guess the last thing, Pete, before we move on, and you're welcome to stay and hang out with the show, but I wanted to know how this affects Chevy. Like Cheveldayoff, this is the big thing. I mean, because we talked. It was funny because we just had you on, and we're discussing this whole thing about Cheveldayoff. And the next day we were discussing how Dallas should look at guys like Enroth in goal. So we really are prophetic on this show. But Cheveldayoff, does this buy him? Like, my theory is this buys him a little bit of time, actually.
It absolutely does. And I put up a blog just before the show started, and I tweeted out too. This has actually changed my evaluation of him.
Right.
There is there's so much that happened in this deal that really didn't sort of bubble to the surface other than getting rid of the Evander Kane problem child and then sort of the idea that maybe Bogosian needs to change of scenery too. But as is pointed out, he saved a lot of money. Chevy took almost $40 million off the books. I mean, that's an insane amount of money to move out in terms of what's going on. Not only that, he's given himself another defenseman back who had one of the backdiving contracts from the old CBA.
Yep.
His room now, even in his current budget, with the $2.5 million savings, to add another winger if he needs to be, and the Jets need a third-line left winger,
right,
without even ruining his cap situation and internal budget this year. But he's also added depth going forward. And I know yesterday I wrote that really the Kane trade is sort of like trading for 3 lottery picks because you can never really project out what you get when you trade for draft picks and prospects who aren't in the NHL right now. You're still gambling with what's coming back.
You sure are.
But in this case, he's done a lot of things here. And the one thing you need to do in the NHL to make deals is you need depth. And you can see what's happened with teams who haven't had organizational depth when they haven't gotten things back, Toronto being a prime example of letting players walk with no return. And what happens to you down the road? He's now got some depth in different positions to make deals to add players. And he's got the salary space. I mean, this is an incredibly deft tactical trade, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. And I think Winnipeg fans in time will come to realize what a watershed moment this is for the franchise with this trade. We won't be able to gauge who won it for a few years, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But essentially, if you're Buffalo, you've got 3 years of Evander Kane to get a winning team in place and to make sure he wants to stay there after this deal expires. If you're Winnipeg, you basically have 2 prospects and a draft pick. One prospect for each year and a draft pick for the remainder of Kane's contract. Yeah. And you got Drew Stafford.
Right.
I'm not. I don't think anyone should really be crying about that. But but fans will. But people need to give Chevy his props. I think he took a very bad situation and did something quick. He didn't let it linger because he recognized.
Yeah, I agree with
that. That was the problem with everything else. He let things linger on too long, and he turned it. You know, he came up pretty good, and they should be happy, the fans.
It kind of amazes me. Yeah, I agree. It kind of amazes me about this. And Mike, go ahead. Sorry, Mike. You had him.
I was just going to add on to what Peter. A pathway in the next couple of years with Ehlers, with who's the other? Nick Patan. With a number of their having 6 prospects in the World Juniors, and I think a few of them, could be in the NHL within a year or two. I mean, excising the cancer that Kane had on that organization, getting something good for him and clearing the way for the internal prospects that they have. I mean, I think Cheveldayoff hit a home run in that respect. I still think Buffalo got the best player in the deal, and if Kane can straighten out his off the ice issues, on the ice he's a great player. I think both teams will benefit. I think Buffalo gets the best player in the deal, but I think Cheveldayoff hit a home run.
Well, we don't know who they're drafting yet. That's the only way about the best player in the deal, because that first round draft pick. This first round is such a good draft. It's going to be hard to say.
We'll see.
This ties into, Kevin, to your story about Phil Kessel that you wrote today in USA Today, and this will make me have to talk about the Maple Leafs for a second. But the idea here is we've now seen over the last 2 years around the trade deadline, we saw Evander Kane having to get dealt. Last year we had Marty St. Louis having to get dealt. And the common theory, I think we'd all sit here and say, well, and how many times you hear, well, he had to deal him. He's hamstringing him. There's going to be no way he's going to get what he wants for him. Over and over and over again. We always hear that being said, and yet, no one can deny that Tampa made a great trade for Marty St. Louis, and that they got a lot back, and no one can deny that Winnipeg gets a lot back, which is why I think you have to look at Phil Kessel and even Dion Phaneuf or some of these other problem players it seems like you can get more than you would think for these kind of guys.
Well, that's a fair assessment. I think you have to look at it 2 ways. First of all, in this situation, you traded him. It was a unique situation. I mean, the Buffalo Sabres really, part of their game plan is to be not so good. And so, they could take an injured player. I mean, there weren't as many options for Evander Kane as you would have liked, but in this case, Sabres were willing to pay a lot. I mean, that was a significant yield. And then last year, what Yzerman did last year with St. Louis is remarkable. He limited to one team.
That was an even bigger thing, one team.
And he managed to convince that team to give him everything he did, and then managed to sign, Callahan, who, Callahan is always an interesting player because, some GMs view him as a tremendous asset, a guy that hits and scores goals, and other people say he's really a glorified third liner playing in the top 6. I see him as more than that. I think when you factor in his leadership and his hitting and his scoring. So, but I know what you're saying, and I think it's a valid point that I think everyone would agree you can, as a general rule, do better in the summer because you have more people. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible to make these deals. It just depends, on the circumstances. And I think it's possible that Kessel could be traded if he went to the right team. I mean, the Arizona Coyotes aren't going anywhere. You could trade him there if you could make the proper deal. Why not? I mean, you could trade him. Yeah, I think you could even trade him to the Nashville Predators as long as you weren't looking for someone off the roster.
Right.
Because they have the cap room as well. I mean, you could trade him to the Carolina Hurricanes. And I think that it would be a good fit for all of those teams. I mean, but, you can't trade him to the New York Rangers. You would, I'm sure, if you're Phil Kessel, you shouldn't want to go there. But, yeah, but the Tampa Bay, Lightning, you couldn't trade him to. You couldn't trade him to the Pittsburgh Penguins. There are a lot of teams you couldn't trade him to. Where you could trade him in the offseason.
Yeah, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. I mean, if you look at like somebody like Phaneuf, and I know that like teams like Anaheim and Dallas have been, linked to him, and I'm not saying I know anything about possible deals or that, but if you look at, like, say, Anaheim's situation, they have two guys who make up almost $7 million in Boschman and Sheldon Surrey coming off their books at the end of this year. Now, they probably want to re-sign Boschman because he's still a pretty effective defenseman, but they have the cap room going forward. If they want to add a guy like Phaneuf and his $7 million salary, they have the cap room now and they have the cap room going forward. So it makes a bit of sense if they want to make a playoff run to add a guy who can have an impact like a Phaneuf. The thing with Toronto is they're going to want, again, picks and prospects back, and a team that has the cap room, the picks, and the prospects all in one package to be able to send that to Toronto. There's probably not that many teams that qualify, and that's why, like Kevin said, in the summer when some of those restrictions are not there, that's when the possibility of developing a market and then getting a deal done is more likely.
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
Plus, I think in Phaneuf's case, I think the Maple Leafs are going to have to eat some of that salary. I mean, that's just a little high. I mean, I think it's a different situation than Phil Kessel. Phil Kessel is still scoring like an $8 million player.
Right.
Where Phaneuf, I don't know that is playing at that level.
Right.
Yeah. Either eat some of the salary or take a salary player back.
Yeah.
They probably want to take the salary player back rather than, paying $2 million for another 6 years. I mean, if they take a $5 million player that the other team doesn't want or wants to dispose of, then that's probably more beneficial to them.
Mike, you make an interesting point there in that, finding these teams and how many of them are available. Well, I think that's what Chevy looked at, too, when he started talking to Murray. He realized, I've got to find the right team who has all these things available.
Yeah.
And that window may close in the summer once we have Canadian dollar issues. There may be more teams, but there's also teams like Chicago, LA, who have the same situation as the Leafs of needing to shed some salary. And the early bird may have gotten the worm here. And I would suspect that, I would hope that Craig McTavish's phone is, off, ringing a little bit too, of teams wanting to look at the Oilers, who have a wealthy owner, who have some room, and have the ability to take on some salary.
Yeah,
Can I ask Kevin if it's possible for a general manager who is managing the 30th place team to win the GM of the Year award? Because I'm prepared to give it to Tim Murray right now. Because trading Jonas Enroth, who is a good young goaltender, I don't know if he's a number one, but trading Jonas Enroth, who is playing for a contract and probably, he's got motivation to play as well as possible, and boost his numbers, to Dallas, who I think needs some goaltending because of the things we talked about in the last few webcasts. And they get a third-round pick, and they get one of the bigger sieves in the NHL the last couple of years in Anders Lindback. Is a genius move. It is absolute. If their goal is to finish in 30th place, getting Anders Lindback is a genius move by Tim Murray.
Yeah, only if they play him, but I don't see Ted Nolan sticking him between the pipes.
The funny thing about this is they played each other last week, I was told, and Lindback played against the Sabres and looked absolutely horrible.
Exactly.
So then you go and you trade for him. That was just...
One point I wanted to make about Kevin Cheveldayoff, and I think that's been lost a little bit, is he has not been aggressive before this trade while sitting in the GM chair in Winnipeg, and that has absolutely stunned everyone who has known him, because prior to him becoming general manager in Winnipeg, he guided the Chicago Wolves, and when he was there, everybody said of him he was the best potential GM who wasn't already in the NHL. And then, of course, he went to the Blackhawks as well, and really was prepared to be a GM. Had served his apprenticeship, had done his due diligence and understanding the position, and everyone expected a lot from him, which always led me to believe that Winnipeg is an interesting franchise because it seems like the ownership is pretty heavily involved there, and I kind of wondered, whether he was totally free to be Chevy. So who knows? We'll never know for sure. But this to me while it's being cast as him being un-Shovel Dayoff like, to me it seems like what I expected him to do when he got the job.
Yeah,
like
that's such a great point. That's so exactly dead on. I was a big proponent of him, and he would make great moves in Chicago with the Wolves. But the Wolves, whoever always told me, his detractors at the time would obviously say, well, the Wolves are like an NHL franchise. They've got tons of money. They can do whatever they want, and he's got complete freedom to do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
So it's easy to become the general manager of the AHL Chicago Wolves. That's not a hard position to have because you can go and get whatever you need to get. But he was very creative at how he did it, even with the Wolves, and that's why I was so excited. And his personality is not a sit-back type personality at all. So that's what always baffled me about. He became very silent in the whole process and very, straight ahead. I agree. That's a great point. This is very much the kind of move that he would have made with the Wolves, or just a smart move and a very aggressive move at the same time. He obviously got the. Either he suddenly got the go-ahead to make moves, or he was just afraid of making a move until he got his experience in the NHL and knew how to make these kind of moves. Maybe we don't know. I mean, he's also a very methodical person. So that's what I always wrote it off as. It was either, Kevin, you're right. It was either like an overbearing, not overbearing, but a completely controlling ownership, or him just being so meticulous in terms of, I am not going to be taken as a rookie GM until I know exactly what I'm doing here, and
Peter,
just feeling the league out.
Peter, what do you think about
that? Kevin, you make a really good point. Gary Lawless had an article out recently about the relationship with Kevin Shovel Dayoff and how he fit together with the ownership. And in the article, he said, Mark Chipman said, this is how we're going to do things. This is how I want you to base your strategy around this. And Chevy bought in and said, okay, which is patient, timely, practical use of resources. Mm-hmm. And you talk about what ownership's involvement is in some of these deals. Well, last year at the trade deadline, Mark Chipman was in the room, and he was involved in decisions being made about what kind of salary. And as Chevy said in his post-deadline press conference, he was involved in budgetary decisions. So Mark Chipman's very involved in that way, but he's involved from a nickels and dimes, a dollars and cents sense, not a strategic, get this player, I'm a big fan of him kind of owner, which is what some people believe Daryl Cates is in Edmonton. And Mark Chipman deserves some credit of saying, I want to be involved, but I know how far I can be involved. And I think that's a good thing for a franchise, and it can quickly be a bad thing if the owner doesn't understand his limitations as well. In this case, I really do think Mark Chipman gets where he needs to be.
Well, Peter, let me ask you one thing quickly. Do you perceive that there's sort of like a Moneyball scenario here? If you remember the movie where, they make a trade and the money that they saved, that the GM was able to use that money to make other deals. I mean, is there a scenario here where Shovel Dayoff saved them so much money on this deal with, with Myers and Bogosian, where Myers' deal was front-loaded, Bogosian's was sort of back-loaded? Is he going to be able to add like a Daniel Winnick or add another piece that they need before the deadline because they saved a little money on the budget?
I think they are, and they have an extra first-round pick.
Right, they've got more to do, which is also a great chip. Yeah, for getting that. You're right.
In a relatively deep draft, even though it'll be low first round, that's currency right now, and there are a lot of teams who need that kind of currency going forward. Because they have to shed salary and they can't take any back. It's a very deft move to get that extra pick of either St. Louis or New York or the New York Islanders, depending on what Buffalo gives them.
It is.
Put it out there, and and he's got the cap space to take on. Some people are speculating Sean Bergenheim. I don't know if you're going to throw a first-round pick to get him, but it's a very interesting thing.
What do you think, Kev?
Well, I think if I'm Winnipeg, I hang on to my second draft pick because, one of the hard reality truths about the NHL is that if you're Edmonton or Winnipeg, I think it's hard to recruit there. It's hard to get free agents to go there. Yeah. They tend to want to go to either bigger markets or better climates or whatever. And so for that reason, I think teams like Edmonton and Winnipeg have to draft extremely well. So for him to have that bonus first-round pick, if I'm him, I would just hang on to that and just knowing that this year I'm going to have two, and in this case because it's a deep draft, elite level prospects, and hang on to that and not move that. And it certainly won't take a first-round pick to get Bergenheim, who I think would be a good fit for them. I think he's a pretty good hockey player. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think they'll hang on to that pick, unless this summer there's a bold move they want to make. But this is a team, as you've pointed out, that has prospects in waiting. They have a decent team now, not a great team. They have a decent team, and now they just need to add layers of depth and improvement. So. I think if I'm a fan of the Winnipeg Jets today, I'm pretty happy about where this team is at.
You gotta be. The next, my blog today is as I've been going through and trying to, and we're not gonna do the rumor chart today, guys. We'll do it tomorrow because what I've been doing, this is one of those domino type moves and it changes a lot of players in the rumor chart at once. So I've been trying to reshuffle the deck there with my chart. But the one player that I think that this could affect the most is Keith Yandle from talking to people today, because of the fact that you had other players who were in on Myers, Anaheim being one of them, Tampa being another, LA not in on Myers, but definitely interested in Yandle. But you have teams who really wanted to maybe make something like this happen. Now that Myers is gone, there's a bit of of a musical chairs going. Can we wait for the draft? Can we wait for the draft now, or will this be made now? I think what this did is it made everybody a little bit uncertain about players that they thought they could sit around and wait for the draft for, because now this may have changed that. And Mike, go ahead.
There are two separate markets, and you're right. And there's a market for defensemen with term, and there's a market for defensemen who are rentals.
Right.
And Myers was probably at the top of the defenseman with term list. He had 4 years left at $5.5 million. Yandle is a top offensive defenseman, and he's only got 1 year left. So I'm not sure if Arizona is going to be able to exact the same price that a Myers would, but he is a high-end offensive player. But he's in a completely different category than the guys like Mathot and Franzen and Mahal.
Right. Those guys, but Yandle's in that category of guys who could wait for the draft. And what I think in terms of this,
here's the biggest problem with Yandle, is they want, as part of their return, they want a young player off the roster.
Right.
That's why like the Red Wings, can't go there because they want a Tatar or a Nyquist or something of that nature. Their argument is Yandle is among the best at what he does, and he's 29 years old. Right. So he's still in the prime of his career. So we need a player who's younger but who is playing in the league, coming back, and preferably a forward. And so if they're trying to get that off of Detroit, then we can assume they're trying to do that off of Tampa and LA. So that makes it hard to make that trade now, and as opposed to waiting till the summer when I think then all bets are off for what you can get. So, Yandle could be one of those guys that, will have to wait until the summer.
But when you wait till the summer, now he is going into his UFA year. You do get that does change his value again.
It does, but I think you can get, I do think you can get a first-round pick and a player off the roster. Yandle is a difference maker.
Right. No, I know, and there's a lot, and he's one of the hardest commodities to get right now in the NHL, and as we've seen.
Yeah, you still get him for another year,
right?
And you can re-sign him,
But for those contending teams, the benefit of getting him for a playoff run and for that, they'll have him for that extra year. If they trade for him in the summer, they have him for next year at least.
Right.
But if you trade for him before March the 2nd, you have him for the playoff run and the year. So that's a valuable commodity for a team that needs that power play defenseman or defenseman who can play 20 minutes to add the guy now rather than adding him at the beginning of before the beginning of next season.
Yeah, but it doesn't help you if you have to take a player off your roster, a younger player. So
you
take Foley off their roster.
Right.
That's not going to work. Yeah.
But is that a fair deal? I mean, at the same time, you could sit there and say Toffoli, okay, yeah, he's a great player, but Voinov now, and the latest thing is the Russians are coming out, and the Russian coach came out and said that this is a problem with American society, Voinov, and it's just ridiculousness that's going on. Out there, but completely ludicrous. But yeah, at the same time, I would do Toffoli for Myers. I mean, for Yandel.
I don't think they'd take that trade straight up. I think they want more than that. But I don't think that helps LA. This is a team that already struggles to score goals. Now you're going to disrupt their other line as well.
Yeah, it's true, but they're not going. It's all depending on where. I don't think they're going anywhere unless they get a defenseman to fill in.
Which is why I think they're more in the rental market than they are in the market for Yandel.
Yeah,
because
that's very possible, and but we'll definitely see. What do you have news-wise, Josh? Before we get into our NHL draft simulator today.
Yes, lots of stuff here, guys. First of all, Dallas forward Antoine Roussel earlier suspended 2 games for his cross-check to Boston's Adam McQuaid on Tuesday night. Roussel's cross-check can neither be classified as reflexive nor defensive. The players square off and face off each other well in advance of Roussel striking McQuaid, and Roussel can see that McQuaid has dropped his stick. This action is proactive, not reactive.
It's categorized as dirty, and it was really dirty from a sort of. I mean, he's a type of guy that a lot of teams would like on their team, but he's one of those Weasley guys that I think annoys the opponent more than anybody.
I so much wish when I read these things that Orson Welles could be reading them to us. Like it would be so awesome to have like an actual, old English actor giving absolute, fervor to the language that we hear from suspensions. Because like if you could do a funny podcast or a funny video, that would be one to do. Because if you know somebody like that.
Like John Collins.
It's very well written. I agree with you. I think a nice Orson Welles or of who's the guy that does the NHL Live?
Liev Schreiber. Yeah.
Liev Schreiber, yeah.
Yeah, just him in front of a fireplace, with a pipe and just like and with a book open, reading the suspensions.
I said a long time ago, guys, they should do a 24/7 on the player safety.
What did you read? Was it Keith McGrath who just did a story on this in Toronto?
Kevin McGrath.
Kevin McGrath, right. He just did a really interesting story and on this whole suspension thing. He'd spent some time in the room, and one of the things that he loved, he asked them if anyone ever talked themselves out. Did you see this? If anyone had ever talked themselves out of a suspension. He asked this, like gone for a meeting and actually managed to talk themselves out of it. And they said, yeah, that it actually did happen a couple times. And the one they brought up was last year, a hit against Braden Shen. Gosh, I can't remember who it was. But it was like a young kid a rookie kid who came on, and I was at the game. Came off the bench like he was on fire. Ran right into the corner and hit Shen. Yeah. And they asked him, well, look at this. I mean, you jumped to the bench. It looks like you're completely premeditated. You're going to go kill that guy. And he said, no, I'm a rookie. He says, go back a little bit further. See that? See the coach hit me on the back there? He's like, if you don't get out there and hustle your ass off, you're off this team. That's what he said to me. So I went off the bench and I ran as fast as I could. And they looked around at each other in the room. And they said, yeah, we buy it. That makes sense. All right. And they didn't get a suspension. That was pretty cool.
You can only use that excuse once, though.
Right, now everybody knows to use that excuse, but now that article's out. But anyway, Josh, continue.
Guys, Las Vegas, it's gonna happen. Las Vegas.
They're halfway there.
Well on its way to showing the NHL that it deserves an expansion team. Less than 48 hours into season ticket drive, Hockey Vision Las Vegas says it is already halfway to the goal of 10,000 deposits.
And you tell 2 friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. Go ahead, Josh.
Blackhawks forward Patrick Kane, reflective about his own past after the Evander Kane deal yesterday. After all, Patrick, as you guys know, attracted some unwanted attention from off-ice incidents early in his career. Everyone kind of has their own maturation process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you go through some bumps in the road, that's for sure. Patrick said following the Evander Kane trade, per the Chicago Sun-Times, everyone has a different path, that's for sure. I was lucky enough when I was going through my bumps that the Blackhawks stuck with me and gave me another chance. I wouldn't
And that he did most of those things in Buffalo.
Yes.
Yeah,
that is true.
The difference is Patrick Kane's bump was called Mount Everest.
And he did it in Buffalo, and it was not in Chicago. So that also helped. Too.
Well, I remember the off-ice stuff too that happened with him getting really drunk, and I think that was Wisconsin. Was that in Wisconsin when that happened?
Still not in Chicago. Yep.
Anyway, it was a college town, and he got totally hammered, and it was some embarrassed, like trying to pick up chicks and all that good stuff. Moving on. When's the last time you guys heard an NHL player talk about needing to make a trade? Like the team needing to make a trade. Do you guys hear that too often?
Yeah, no, that's
Marcus Naslund.
Marcus Naslund. No, it's been a while. It's been a while. Maybe Murray Craven might have said something to me back in the 90s.
Well, how about this? Cam Fowler did. Cam Fowler said Bob Murray has been pretty adamant about trying to add another D-man. He told the LA Times this week, "We feel comfortable with the group we have, but if there's somebody who can be brought in to help us, that's always good too."
There you go.
You don't hear that too often.
No. That's his way of maybe that's his way of keeping it from being him. Going, Josh.
Quote of the week, guys, happened in Winnipeg this morning. Well, it's kind of funny actually. The Winnipeg Jets on the ice today, and Drew Stafford being interviewed on the ice, or I guess right when they got off the ice, and Bufflin walked by. "Yeah, Staff, effing welcome, bud. It's the start of it all with the media."
Nice. Can you imagine Drew Stafford being pulled into Murray's office? I thought about this, and he's like, "You've been traded," and Stafford's like, "Florida, Florida, 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 Florida." Winnipeg. Ah, gosh. All right.
I'm a free agent at the end of the year.
What'd you say?
If Stafford had a real sense of humor and Myers, they would have showed up in tracksuits today.
Yep.
Yes.
Stafford was on Hockey Central at noon yesterday, and they told him or asked him if he was gonna show up in a tracksuit to the first meeting. And he said that he was. It was unfortunate. He just bought 20 of them.
Wow, that is unfortunate.
So he was. He said he was looking forward to wearing them there, but he said that he won't ruffle any.
Yeah, but you can never have enough tracksuits, so don't feel so bad for him.
That's true.
All right, Josh, what else? Anything?
And finally, the last one, I want to tip my cap to Evgeny Nabokov, who retired yesterday. Quite an emotional press conference. I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but, I mean, myself, I'm not a Sharks fan, but felt bad for him year after year taking the blame for the Sharks' woes, not making the playoffs. And it was always him that seemed to be the forefront that was getting the blame that they couldn't get past that team to advance to the next round. I honestly would have liked to have seen the Sharks win just for him when he was in net.
I wanted to play something for you guys because of this. I appreciate this, and hopefully this is. I got to skip this ad, but I'm going to play it for you here on YouTube. All right, so this is the top 10 all-time Nabokov saves. So this is really good. Somebody sent me this, and I love this.
He was well liked too, Ek.
Nabokov was the least Russian player I've ever met.
Yeah.
Put it out there. There was nothing.
Yeah, his nickname in San Jose was Johnny. They called him Johnny.
There was nothing Russian about it. And he was like, if you didn't know, if somebody told me his name is Evgeny and he's from Russia, you wouldn't think for a second that he was Russian. He was a great ping pong player too. All right, so here we go. We're going to start this out. This is Nabokov's 10 saves. This is number 10. Let's see. Don't really remember.
Complete with replays.
Yeah, it's really not the greatest thing. All right, number 9. Let's see. We'll see how far we go with this. I mean,
it's 3 minutes long.
Yeah, we're not gonna do this whole thing. Let's move forward a little bit.
You guys call him maybe the best regular season goaltender for a while in the NHL?
That's a tough statement. One of the better ones for sure.
I mean, how many President's Trophies did the Sharks win when he was in net? They won a couple, didn't they?
Oh yeah, no, the Sharks were definitely that kind of a team, right? So, all right, let's go to the top 2 here. All right, so we got number 2. All right, He's an above average goaltender, but I don't think he's ever going to be in the mix for the Hall of Fame. He never won a Stanley Cup. Here's the number 1. They'll just look at the number 1 Nabokov save. This is. Oh wait, this is. Remember this? This was in overtime.
Yeah.
Playoffs. I'll never forget this save. Yeah, this was
on your buddy Brad Richards.
My buddy Brad Richards. This is why he won't score 50 points. Can't bury it. If you can't bury that shot, you're done. Yeah. All right, so that's all we have for that. But let's get into the draft simulator then. The Draft Simulator is brought to you by. No, we don't have a sponsor for this. Anyway.
Mexican Coke?
No. No. The Draft Simulator today is. Oh boy. Remember that the Sabres have not won this yet. And today we have the New Jersey Devils. All right. They.
Wow.
Maybe Lou's staying around.
6.5% chance to win the lottery. Connor McDavid in New Jersey. What would this mean?
How many days is it now? So Buffalo, we 7 or 8 times now.
This is the 8th time.
And no Buffalo yet.
No Edmonton, no Buffalo. Neither of those two teams have come up.
Buffalo's gotten Eichel every time, and Edmonton's gotten Hannafin every time, so I don't think they're going to be upset.
Right, but still, I mean, we've yet to but New Jersey, that would be a bizarre scene because New Jersey's really a team of veterans sort of right now going the opposite direction.
If you want to take all the offense out of Connor McDavid, that's the
how to make Connor McDavid a checking forward. Draft him into New Jersey. Well, that's not quite the case. But anyway, all right, that's all the time we have for today, guys. Fun show as always. Thank you, Peter, for jumping on.
My pleasure.
And we will talk to you guys tomorrow. There will be a show tomorrow. I'm probably going to be doing it from Jack Frost Mountain. So if you're in the area of Jack Frost Ski Resort, my kids have their school skis trip day up there, and I promised I would go. But I also said, being this close to the trade deadline, I don't want to not do a show. So we'll do a show tomorrow. And if you're in the Jack Frost area and you want to come to see a live recording, just find me in the lodge somewhere with a laptop and headphones on, and we'll hang out. We'll talk to you soon. Remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Talk to you then.